Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Kurt Thompson.
My friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Hey, Kurt.
Hey, Pep.
Man, it is so good to be with you today.
Always.
Yeah. For you, the most beautiful listeners in the world out there, I just want to say that, and we've talked about this a bit in some other episodes, but you know, when we record these podcasts, we try to carve out enough time for Kurt and Amy and I to have connecting time, and you know, frankly, a lot of the work that we're doing is very similar to. I mean, it's the work that we're doing. We're doing the work together, and so we often carve that time out. And you know, today we had a full plan to record 2 episodes today, and that time went over so long that we're barely going to get this one in. However, you know, to a person, we all said, yeah, but that's just as important as what we're doing here. And having the opportunity to have that time with you where we're doing all of these things that we're talking about, is, I mean, I don't think it's too big to say life-changing for me. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I think it is, it's a huge part of my growth and change and my practice of being human and trying to be a better human. So thank you. Thank you for carving that time out, and even though it went into our recording time today.
Well, thank you. I as we said, it's just we were saying, we are recording this just a little under a week before Christmas of 2024, and it is, you know what, it is that time when we reflect and name and unflinchingly that we live in a world of tribulation in which Jesus is the source of cheer that he asks us to be. He asks us to be people of good cheer. In this world, you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. And we think of Christmas hymns. This whole notion that Jesus comes into a world that is fraught, and it's not always easy to see light in the middle of so much darkness. And we were commenting about how much there can be around us.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, in this season in which this particular podcast season, and we're talking about rupture and repair, we recognize that we are a people of ruptures.
Yes.
And it's not just the ruptures that we know that happened, you know, this week or this month, or sometime even in our lifetime. We are the people who have carried ruptures from the 3rd chapter of Genesis forward, and we carry the ruptures of our parents and our grandparents. Often we're carrying ruptures that, like, we don't even know that we're carrying,
right?
Until we start to be more curious about where they might be, and then if we are willing to take the Holy Spirit at its word and Jesus at his word, that when he says, yeah, the Spirit is going to come and reveal you, he's going to reveal the truth, he's going to reveal, he's going to convict, he's going to heal. And, you know, on our live broadcast where we recorded the very first episode of this season, we said we want to be people of repair, and we want to start to look for opportunities to create repair, and that means even in our own lives. And I know that you and I talked about, you know, like, oh my gosh, like I can discover that there's this relationship that is, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I was holding.
Yeah, and sometimes there's things that I'm holding, and I'm not even in a relationship with that person anymore. But yeah. I have a relationship with the rupture. I have that relationship. We're good friends. Listen, something happened 25 years ago. I'm not even in the person's life anymore, but that rupture's got, you know, a nice space in my heart and my brain. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So today we're talking about, we're talking about the medium is the message and shaping the rupture by how we tell the story. And so let's jump into that today because it is so important. And even in what we were talking about off camera this morning, off mic this morning, this is part of the deal. We do tell stories to ourselves, and they're not always the best way to be telling those stories.
Yeah. Pep, I think of you with this because like you are an actor, a director, a producer. Dude, that picture of you and Johnny Cash. Oh my gosh. At some point, I don't know. We have to, like, you have to bring it up and like put it on the camera so we can show this picture of you and Johnny Cash on set.
Yeah, that was fun.
In an episode of
Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, if you remember
Dr.
from
Quinn,
the 90s. Yeah.
Medicine Woman. Mm-hmm. Right. So you are familiar with this notion that movies, yes, we go to the movies and we engage the movie, but we think, oh, what's the story about? Or you read a newspaper or you watch a television. There's the sense in which we think that we're really engaging content, this thing that we call content. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Have you encountered this or talked much about this work from Marshall McLuhan back in 1964? Is that
I don't
stuff
think so.
that you've heard about that?
I don't think so. No, I was. Yeah.
So McLuhan was a Canadian sociologist, and back in 1964, he was beginning to write about this notion about mass communication because we were really making the turn toward television, in the West, and how the way the content is delivered. What he's basically saying is that the medium, in this case television, by which we might say whatever the show is or the news is delivered, is the essential of the what that is being delivered. Meaning that we are being shaped. You pick up, you listen to a Fox or an MSNBC broadcast, and you think that the primary thing that you are engaging or encountering is the news content, what the topic is that they're talking about. You think that's what we're encountering. But in fact, we're having an encounter with a particular way in which the people in front of the camera are delivering the message. Mm-hmm. The fact that we are not reading this information, but that we are I'm not even that active.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as an aside, I literally stopped watching news coverage. Kurt, I want to say going on 30 years ago. I read the news every day.
Yeah.
I'm well informed on what's happening. I try to read in a way that I'm not just in an echo chamber. It's hard to do. It's hard. It's hard to do. But yeah, and the reason why I started doing that was because I found myself watching a performance of the news where it was, everything was so, they got to get ratings, and so everything's just so big and sensationalized or whatever. Get your blood boiling, and so you stay tuned and all that kind of thing. I mean, even you'd get a drizzle in California and it'd be like Stormwatch 2021. What the heck? Stormwatch? Well, I got to turn this on. We got a big storm coming. So, anyway, all that to say, yes. I mean, I do feel that. I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this, pardon me. This whole notion that the medium is the message is significant because, as we've perhaps reflected on in other episodes, and we'll eventually talk a little bit more about this today, when we talk about ruptures And as we eventually, we've talked about different forms of ruptures thus far, and we're about to make a turn toward repair. One of the things I wanted us to do is to pause and reflect on and be curious about how we actually are having this conversation.
Yeah.
What are the assumptions that we're making?
Do you have something to drink?
Yeah. Sorry.
You're fine.
Take that again. What are the assumptions that we are making about ruptures in general? Not just the information that you've received from us here on this podcast about the nature of ruptures, but what are the more implicitly absorbed assumptions we make about what does it mean to have a rupture and how do we repair them? What are the assumptions that I'm making about other people and so forth? That really eventually, the what, like what happened to me or what I did to somebody else. We can think that there's a category in which like, oh, there's this thing, that's the content. This is like, oh, what the newscaster is broadcasting. But there are underlying assumptions that are much bigger than this, culturally and even socially and even familially. Like, the assumptions that we make about ruptures and how we do about this that are unspoken, that are going to be that are shaping our posture toward how we begin to move toward repair. The whole notion of when Jesus shows up on the scene, it is still assumed by many that he's going to be coming perhaps with a new set of regulations. And he says, I don't think I've come to abolish the law, the Torah. Mm-hmm. I've come to fulfill it. I've come to let you, I'm pulling the curtain back on what has been behind it from the beginning, that in your brokenness, you have been unable thus far to even comprehend. Things hidden from before the foundation of the world, as Luke's gospel would say, as Jesus would say in that gospel. And so it's, our what we're longing for, and here in this season, is not just that we learn information about ruptures and repairs and how, here are the mechanics about how you fix these things, but we want to become people who are more deeply immersed as rupture repairers. We want to, this is what we are. It's not just, oh, what are the ruptures that I've had and how I can repair them? But like, what does it mean for me to become a repairer of ruptures in this, like for me to become the fullness of Jesus, right? I mean, if we're being conformed to the image of Jesus, it means I'm being trained to be a repairer of ruptures. And part of how I have to do that is to be aware of like, what are the assumptions that the world makes about what the nature of ruptures are, about what repair looks like, so forth and so on. And so that's why I wanted us to, in this episode, to really pay attention, to recognize that how we talk about ruptures and their repairs shape our very experience of it. So it's not just a matter of I dictate a set of facts about what happened between me and my uncle who sexually abused me, for 3 years, or that conversation that I had with my mother or with my sibling or my colleague or the thing that happened to me or that I did to somebody else. It's not just the facts. It is how am I now telling the story? There's a story that we tell about these things. And then, of course, there are the select people to whom we tell the story. I might only just be myself. If I'm just telling the story to myself, that's dangerous enough. Because, man, dude, like leave me alone in a room with myself, and a felony will be committed. There's just no question.
Well, I'll leave you alone in the room, but as long as it's padded.
I mean, this is the thing. If I'm telling a story by myself, to myself, that's when things get really wonky.
Totally. Yeah.
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 And then, there's always the risk that like, I'm just going to tell, I'm just going to tell the story that I want to tell to the people who will only become an echo chamber for me.
Mm-hmm.
We may have talked about this before. I have an acquaintance who once had a friendship, a long-lasting, deep friendship that was fractured permanently. Mm-hmm. And the friend said to this person, and this person, my friend, this person said to them, I can't do this anymore with you, and just left the relationship. Like after 2 decades of close friendship, and my friend was just shattered, like, and completely flummoxed. Like, what am I supposed to do? They will. The one thing that they said to me was like, "You have no idea what it's like to live with you." And you're like, well, goodness. And so my friend began to make a practice,
Mm-hmm.
of when she developed a friendship with somebody. Well, she first started with her immediate family. She started to ask this question: what is it like to live with me? I want to hear what you have to say. What it's like to live with me. What is it like to be my friend? And of course, she's serious. And of course, it makes everybody around her anxious, right? Because like,
Sure.
oh, you really want me to tell you the truth?
Right.
So there's that issue, like the people to whom we tell. And then there's the responses that we make to the story that we tell and to those to whom we tell it. If I tell a story in which people can be only empathic, but never ask me the question, is there any more to this story that has to do with you? Or is there any more to this story about what happened that doesn't have to do with you, and this person's actions or whatever can be explained in ways that don't have to do with you? Now, we'll get to why those things are important, but it is important for us to say we're not trying to leapfrog or avoid or circumvent the reality of ruptures that have happened. But when we head into the work of repair, we want our listeners to be aware that there is a lot of work to do. And often it is work that we're not always even aware that is there to do. This brings us to the question of what we talked about in the difference between what we say content and process. When we did this series on confessional community, we talked a little bit about this notion that, we had this phrase that we want to continually be moving from imagination to incarnation. I want to be as much in the room. I want to be talking with you rather than talking about you with someone else. I want to be talking with you about what's happening between you and me rather than talking about some abstract imagined thing that's outside the room that has to do with vague people. No, it's what's happening between you and me. I'm aware that even right now as we speak, I have a relationship that it's been brought to my attention that hurt their feelings without my being aware that I was doing that. And I'm like, wow, I have some work to do. And, the impulse is on my part to, what do I want to do? I want to tell a story a certain way that I want to tell it. I mean, clearly there's been a rupture.
Right.
And the rupture, I don't believe is major. I don't believe it's catastrophic, but clearly there's a rupture and there's repair work to do. And of course, my rush, where I want to rush to is to tell a story in a certain way. And it'd be tempting to want to go tell a story to somebody else about this person and my experience of that. And that is not the way. That is not the way of Jesus. It's where I want to have a conversation with this person whom I love deeply.
Mm-hmm.
In order for me to have a better sense, like, well, what's the story that they're telling? What's the story that they've experienced? I really want to hear that, and I want them to hear the story that I've experienced, and all those things. But we have to recognize that so often, once the rupture happens, I begin to tell a story about this, and because I might feel things so deeply, and my heart might be so tender, I tell the story that I'm telling like over and over and over and over again in my head, like 1,000 times in a day.
Right.
Where it becomes increasingly more solid.
Yeah.
increasingly more real. And that's a process. That's not the content of what actually happened.
Yeah. I picture this visually. I picture this rupture that may have happened, but then as you keep telling that story, I almost picture this physical thing like getting bigger and bigger and changing and sort of evolving into something that you know that we're feeding in some
Right.
ways. Yeah.
Exactly right. I mean, this notion that process, which is the movement, right? We like to say that the mind is an embodied relational process that emerges from within and between brains. It's process. It's moving, and that process is anchored in what I'm paying attention to. And the question is, am I paying attention to this story that I'm telling in my mind, or am I also being willing to pause and pay attention to, like, well, wait a minute, what is the other person feeling? What is the other person experiencing? We recognize that for those who are listening to whom horrible things have happened, we're not asking us to pay attention to the other party prematurely. We are not asking that. We're simply recognizing that I have to be aware of the dynamics that are in play with me, where in which in my storytelling mechanism, in my neural activity, I can become an agent in which the felt experience of the rupture is intensified because of how I am actually processing, quote unquote, the content, if you will.
Yeah.
So we really want to be aware of this because there can be, we like to say there's two possible divergent, two different and unhelpful choices that we can lead toward. The first is when and this is true, that list of people that I need to forgive.
Yeah.
Well, why do I have a list? Well, because at some level, I have buried them in my brain. And essentially I've made the stories less than what they are. And now I, they go there, I put them in my basement, right? But in so doing, I said, yeah, it's not important enough for me to bring it into my kitchen and open the box up and take a look at it. So I'm making the story less than what it is. I'm also telling that story in isolation. There we are. I'm not telling anybody. So I'm put it in my basement so nobody knows that it's there, which means it has the opportunity to go into my brain and very, very, very slowly become an abscess. Very, very slowly. So I can tell the story in isolation. I then get to a point where I functionally deny that the ruptures even occurred, right? Because I live as if it hasn't happened. I'm not paying attention. It's like I pretend that it hasn't happened. And in so doing, I limit the depth of the emotional distress or the pain. So there's some people who are listening here who've experienced ruptures that they have conveniently put in these basement closets.
Mm-hmm.
And, being the good Christians that we are, we certainly don't want to, but we're forgiving. I've forgiven that, which is the euphemism for I put it in my basement and I just don't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I end up doing is I can end up taking responsibility for other people's behavior at the expense of our own feelings. The whole notion of when Jesus says, don't condemn anybody else. Like, you want to say, hey, let me take that speck out of your eye. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you can see more clearly to go help your brother or sister with the speck that is in their eye. Like, notice, he said, no, first take care. And what is the log? What is the log? The log is not just my imperfection. The log is not just my brokenness. The log is also well, where did that come from? Is it possible that the brokenness that I carry with me has to do with the ruptures that I experienced in my family growing up, or my grandparents and my great-grandparents, all the generational stuff that basically belongs to me,
right?
That I haven't taken care of?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've found myself in situations where a rupture happens with someone, and then as I look into it, and I start to realize that a lot of what caused that particular rupture had nothing to do with what was even going on with that person. It was stuff that was going on with me from that I brought in the room with me before this person even came into my life. And so yeah.
And so and we oftentimes think that when Jesus talks about taking that log out of our own eye, like he's saying, like, look, you got your own problems, you got your own brokenness, you can get that cleared up first.
I think also someone said to me recently, because I've been doing sort of a practice that you've been doing with the forgiveness thing, and where without going into it too much, I think of 3 different people every day, or 3 people every day that I want to do this process with. And someone recently said, "Well, do you ever put yourself on that list?"
Wow.
That's what I said.
Wow.
Wow. I'm like, no. So that being like, maybe there's a log there that I need to dig into that a little bit and see, where do I need to forgive myself, and where do I need to, what story am I telling about myself that may not be correct? And
right. Yeah. And so in this way, as we minimize ruptures, we somehow take responsibility for other people's stuff, and at the expense of our own story, which means I'm not actually even dealing with the log that is in my eye, how it happened, came to be there. And so, like, all those things that I need to take care of. And sometimes we will do this. We will limit that story of rupture to protect against a greater grief. We often say, things happen to us in the first 2 decades of life, when the reality is that as children, we are powerless to know what to do in the face of adults in the room that are doing whatever it is that they're doing. And the challenge is that when those ruptures happen when I'm 4 and 10 and 17, and they're not ever named, I get stuck at those developmental ages. And so there is the part of me that was wounded when I was 4 and 10 and 17 that didn't know he was wounded. Things happen, and I'm just trying to live my life and survive like the elements of my life. But then this part of me gets frozen in time. And so here I am now, I'm 25 or 35, or now in my early 60s, and I'm, you're sending a 4-year-old to do a man's job.
Yeah.
And the moments where we feel overwhelmed, or we feel like we know that when we feel overwhelmed, we know that when that happens, that it is some rupture that is coming into the room that has not been repaired.
When I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Right, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, and by overwhelmed, I don't mean like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed because I've got 10 people in my kitchen and I'm trying to cook the tenderloin.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
We get that. We're really talking about when I'm feeling emotionally overwhelmed by events, by relationships, and so forth. Ideally, we would pause and take a breath and say, I only have to do one thing at a time. Well, I don't do that. I think I need to be all things to all people at all times in all places. Oh, that's God. I can't, but like, this is, and we have these things, which means at some point, there was a point where I felt overwhelmed and nobody came for me. So I think of the number of times when the 3 of us, you, Amy, and me, have been on, on our conversations, and any one of us have felt overwhelmed. We come to these recording times,
right,
feeling overwhelmed with something, and the very presence of someone else changes the game. The very presence of being able to name the overwhelm, because we've practiced assuming that somebody's coming for me.
Yeah.
In this moment. And I'm learning not to be afraid of ruptures or these things, right? I'm learning not to try to protect against greater loss, because I'm going to assume that somebody's going to come for me. in that regard. And in this way, sometimes when we limit, when we make the story less than what it is, we find a way that this is shame, kind of stepping into the room. And it goes from my imagination of my remembrance of this to the story to actually making the story so big. Now, I don't get to incarnation. I don't deal with the real events. Instead, it locks into my imagination and becomes so big that I then have to put it in the basement.
Yeah.
Because shame is saying, you do not have what it takes to do this. And then it makes the one with whom I have the rupture less and less real, because I'm burying that. The other option that I have is that I can make the story more than what it is. I end up also telling the story in relative isolation. We said earlier, we can end up in our echo chambers where I tell it to a certain group of 2 or 3 people who only affirm my story and my version of the story. And then the story becomes bigger in that sense as well. I expand the facts to fill the depth of my emotional distress. I remember I was a kid on the playground, and we had this guy who everybody kind of tolerated. He was relatively new to our school. Everybody kind of, at the time, kind of tolerated. And I will say, the good news at the end of all this is we're not in touch with each other anymore. But when we last were in touch, as young adults, our relationship was really lovely. But he just moved to a different city. We haven't had that much time. But when he first came, there were certain things that happened, and I said something to him on the playground. I think I'm like in 4th or 5th grade. I said something on the playground, and it really upset him, and he pushed me up against the fence, and he was really mad, and I was afraid. That's all he did. He pushed me up against the fence, and I forget what he said. But he didn't do what I then said, because I was afraid, and I started to cry. It's just 4th, 5th grade. I started to cry.
Yeah.
Now, there are a bunch of girls that were around, and they see me cry. They know that I'm upset. These are girls that I know, and they know me, like, whatever. And they said, "What happened?" And I said, "She hit me." What did I do? I expanded the story to cover my grief, to cover the rupture. I expand, and I mean, like a bees, like a swarm of bees to honey. They ran after this kid, these girls. And I'm like watching from a distance, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And they're like, they are so, and he looks, he's like, what are you, he's completely flummoxed because he doesn't know, and it doesn't matter. I'm kind of like saying, like, you mess with me, and, because he didn't want the girls to not like him.
Right.
But this is me. This is me making the facts of the story bigger to fill the depth of my emotional distress. And then it becomes beyond the rupture itself. Like now I'm contributing to this in a way. We've talked about these echo chambers that we can sometimes enter into. And then I'm actually making other people responsible for things that actually belong to me. Right? I'm making him the bad guy, like a really bad guy.
Right.
Instead of me taking responsibility, say like, yeah, I'm really afraid. And in this, it's just a different way of expanding the story instead of shrinking the story to protect me against a greater loss.
Yeah.
And shame is just in the room again. You don't have what it takes. You're a pipsqueak. You're like all the stories that are rolling in on my beach. And it's the same way in which I make the rupture with that person less real. It's more artificial. It's less real to what it really is. And, we see this happening now in all kinds of settings. We see it in politics. We see it with sexual ethics. We see it with church wounding and deconstruction. We see it with parent and child estrangement. There are all these larger landscape places where the way we process ruptures have become something we're not that aware of. We think that we're paying attention to content. It's Facebook and Instagram and all the things, and Twitter or X and what it used to be, and we think that the content is the words. when in fact we're being shaped by a process that is both enlarging or shrinking ruptures in which we continue to contribute to them without recognizing that we now become caught up in being our own worst enemy in this process. And what we are really wanting to do is recognize what we're trying to do in this series is, and we'll get to this later when we talk about what happens in particular communities, whether those are, we're talking about politics. It's, again, we're going to be going home for the holidays, and how many people are saying, like, I really, I just hope that we don't talk about politics.
Right. There's different people with different opinions, and those opinions are a lot of times strong, and you just, let's just don't talk about it.
Right, because but even if we were to say, oh, I'm going home, and we've got some family members, like you're in Cincinnati, you're in the Cincinnati area, right?
I am.
And we got some people, we got some family members that are coming in for the holidays from Kansas City, where they've been living now for 20 years. And like, we may have some strong opinions about two particular professional football teams.
We may.
But most of us are not, I suppose, but most of us are not worried.
Right. About that conversation.
Chiefs fans or Bengal fans being together over Christmas. We're not worried about that.
Yeah.
But the fact that we would be worried about having people from different political fabrics sitting at the table together tells us that ruptures are already in the room.
Right.
And the ruptures, we can guarantee you, are not about a thing that we call Republicans or Democrats. We're there when it comes to what we think about, the church. It's not about the church. It is about real people with real names who did things. Can we have conversations with real people and become as incarnate as possible? We'll get to eventually this wave of experiences that many people are having. Like, my wife and I are now at a point in time where we're just aware of lots of folks who are our peers who have adult children who have cut them off because of something that happened in some way, shape, or form, and the parents have not yet found a way to be able to repair the rupture. And this is not to suggest that ruptures never happened or whatever, but it is, again, gets back to the stories that we tell, right? The medium and the way we tell the story about the assumptions that we are making. We really have to come to the table of repairing ruptures with as much humility as we possibly can muster. Being able to say, as Isaiah said when he encountered the holy presence in the temple, and he said, woe is me, I am undone, for I am a man of unclean lips, born of a people of unclean lips. And if he were on this podcast and he would say, like, I'm not very good at repairing ruptures because I have been I've had so many ruptures that even the way that I think about how to do this itself needs repairing. And I want us to be aware of this, not to be afraid of it, but to know that what we're going to do as we head toward repairing ruptures, what we're going to do increasingly is to, as we talk about the repair, we're going to what's the nature of these ruptures? What else can possibly be happening here? We want to be unafraid of exploring all the variabilities that are taking place. How can community be helpful? And what are the potential drawbacks of community that we have to be aware of and be talking about along the way, where community can be helpful in the healing, but what do we also have to be aware of in terms of where evil wants to get its fingers into everything, including the very healing process itself? We want to encourage people to be curious about their story, their parents' stories, their grandparents' stories, and how all of that is coming to the repair table How are we coming to the table? Here we come to the table and there is this thing that we want to repair, but there is the me that's coming to the table. And am I able to be present there in a way that is going to be effective? I want to be able to make things as incarnate as possible. I want to name real people. I want to name real events that are limited in time, things that happened at a certain time that are not happening now, but maybe it was my 4-year-old self, my 10-year-old self, but now that I'm 50, how does that make a difference? All these kinds of questions, I just want to say, they make the process faithful. And so where we find ourselves perhaps becoming anxious or becoming worried that we're not going to get what we want, we want to be able to explore, what has my response to this rupture been? And how can my response itself be repaired so that I can then be an agent of repair in a rupture that is possible? As we're going to say, we're going to see later, not all ruptures are reparable.
Right.
Because other parties they're not up for the challenge. They're not able to enter into that. And we know that. There will be some ruptures that we'll look at and we'll say, that is not a rupture that one is going to be able to contend with because the party that we're talking about is so dangerous for real.
Right. Because
of evidence of continued bad behavior. There will be all kinds of things that we're going to do. But lastly, the thing that we really want to pay attention to is this question. We come back to this a lot. What do I want? What do I ideally want at the end of this? And we believe that we who have been given eternity in our hearts, what we want would be people of goodness and beauty in the world.
Yes.
We're going to continue to come back to that over and over again.
Yeah. And thinking about what we want, we have an application for you this week. And so after you've done some contemplating on the ruptures in your life that you would like to repair, and after listening to this particular episode, what assumptions do you bring into the room about the rupture, about the nature of the rupture and repair, and what is expected of you as an agent of healing? What do you notice about your tendency to pay more attention to the content of the rupture or repair and less so to the process? Do you find that you make ruptures out to be more or less than what they have actually been? And what are ruptures in your life that you have decidedly determined, whether consciously or not, are unrepairable? And what is it about not only the rupture itself, but also your own life story that has helped you draw that conclusion? And as always, we encourage you to journal about this, and then, if you feel comfortable, to share your reflections with a trusted friend. Okay, Kurt. Thank you. Thank you for today. And I think about that tangible story that you told of yourself as a little boy on the playground. And I want to share a story with you in the post show that I have. That's. So stick around for that, folks. If you are on YouTube watching us, Amy's going to be joining us, and we always look forward to that. Okay, everybody. Thank you. Love you, Kurt. Thanks.
All right, man. Love you too.